So one of my friends here on the social media is Mr. Goldberg. He makes a lot of comments, especially on Facebook. Sent me a private message and asked, "Do I believe Judaism is orthopraxy?" And my answer was, "I believe that doctrine is central to Judaism." Um, but there's no difference between Orthodoxy and Orthopraxy in Jewish thought. And he asked if I would care to elaborate on this, and so I actually recorded about a 22-minute video that somehow my phone ate. It's the best way I can describe that, and I'm kind of disappointed that it's gone, so I figured I would record this as a live stream, and it'll go up, whether if people are watching this as a live stream, they're watching it, and if otherwise, it'll still be up as a recording that you can watch later. But feel free to comment and question while we do it. The truth is, I'm going to be more looking at the road and not looking so much at the chat. But I here and there I'll look at it. I'm going to go get gas now, so I'll be able to. Certainly, when I'm getting gas, I should be able to react to some of the comments. So feel free to comment. So I really appreciate Mr. Goldberg asking this question, and I tend to reflect on this idea of comparing this to another issue in theology and ideology and philosophy. There's a term that's thrown around mostly in a historical context of deism, although I know some of my Muslim colleagues who are from Turkey are lamenting the spread of deism in Turkey among the youth today. And I said, you guys caught up to, the 1780s, but it's all right. So anyway, with that discussion, I always discuss, when we use the term deism, do you mean mere deism or deism? Right? And it'll be the same question. Do you mean mere orthopraxy or orthopraxy? So every monotheist is also a deist. He's just not merely a deist. The mere deist will see that all there is as creator, but not as sustainer, not believing in providence or prophecy and so forth. But that and so the mere deist is the one who rejects providence and prophecy. The distinction I always make: well, were they mere deists? Certainly, Washington was not, because Washington always referred to providence. That was his favorite term for the deity, was providence. And so by virtue of the fact that he referred to providence means that he was not a mere deist. Jefferson and Franklin were the ones who were maybe, you could question even more what level of beliefs they had, but nonetheless, still within the Jeffersonian and Franklinian ideology, you still had more than just mere deism, both by Jefferson and by Franklin. And if anything, all three of them, whether it was Washington, Franklin, or Jefferson, the main issues that they had were the established religion and the clergy, being kind of a separate class and that aspect, but not, and maybe also some of the aspects of Christian theology that they had problems with, but they did not necessarily reject, the ideas of providence and prophecy, to the point where I know a lot of Muslims, American Muslims, say Jefferson should be considered to be an honorary Muslim. but and maybe to a certain extent Franklin as well. Let's see how much the gas is. Like usually over there, it's a little cheaper. I can't see. We'll go to this one because I have cash. So, but the point that I'm bringing out here is that this term deist is a loaded term, because it's on one hand, yes, they were deists, but they weren't mere deists. That's the same thing. So the same question has to be about Judaism as orthodoxy or orthopraxy. Are we merely orthoprax? Or are we both orthoprax and orthodox? The way one of my rebbeim worded it, my Rosh Hashiva, was he said before he met Rav Avigdor Miller, he was observant, but he was not religious. And that Rav Miller made him religious. This could probably reach straight on through to the other side. As the song goes. So now I'm going to get gas, so I might be interrupting a bit. Is it long enough to reach here? So just hold on a minute. Thank you, sir. We'll fill up cash regular. Here we go. You got it? So we'll go back to what we're saying. So this question of deism versus theism, well, again, so we could say theism is a form of deism. In Judaism, practice and doctrine are both central to our faith, right? Most people, when comparing Judaism and Christianity, would say that Christianity is a religion of creed, and Judaism and Islam is a religion of deed. And then some Protestants will say, well, and the Catholics are legalists, and use that as some kind of a dirty word. Not all Protestants, because there are legalist Protestants also. And that type of discussion will come up as the difference between legalism and by faith alone, sola fide. In Judaism, there never was this distinction. Belief and practice were always one. But I often disagree with certain, even of my own rebbeim, but not all of them, as to say that that belief is primary in Judaism, and this is something certainly the Satmar Rav discussed, because no one can be expected to be perfect in their actions, but it's not that difficult to be perfect in faith. What's the big deal to at least give lip service to faith and perfect faith? What does it hurt your life other than that now that you have these obligations? But it doesn't mean that therefore, as long as whatever in practice you recognize, and this is the example that I was giving kind of when the recording ran out. Essentially like this. the
1, 2, 3,
thank you.
60,
Yep.
40.
Thank you.
Thank you, brother.
Have a good day. So the example I give, and this is talking about issues that we have with things that are related to political correctness today and so forth. Um, wait a second. Okay. And I'll use this as a parable instead. If you have a person who eats pork, a Jew who eats pork, right? And he recognizes that it's wrong, but he can't help himself. He's not eating pork as a matter of anger or rebellion against God or insult against God. He does it because he can't help himself, or he thinks he can't help himself, or he's struggling with this. Of course, he bears the punishment for his sin, which in the ancient times would be he would receive lashes, right? And however God decides to punish a person for such a sin, that's for God to decide, right? But he recognizes the sin. He's not sinning out of rebellion. He's sinning out of struggle, and he and therefore he is Orthodox, but he's not Orthoprax. But it's very easy. But when he's kind of in a state of grace from repentance, he is Orthoprax until he sins again, and then when he repents, he's back to his Orthopraxy. On the other hand, let's say you have a person who doesn't eat pork because he doesn't like it, but he believes there's nothing wrong with it. He thinks you can even make a bracha when you eat pork. You even have a rabbi come and bless the pork, which of course is sinful but also heretical. And of course, you understand the difference that I'm making there as well. One of my Rabbeim, Rav Meir Belitsky, Zeichet Tzaddik Livrocha, he expressed himself by saying that Judaism is indeed a religion of dogma, and that while there is machlokas about whether or not the Yud Gimel Ikrim are dogmas, they are generally accepted as the dogmas of our faith. Beyond that, then we have the question of all right, so the Sefer Ikrim says there's only 3 dogmas, and the Rambam says there's 13, although some people will say those 13 all fit into the 3 categories of the Sefer Ikrim, but nobody denies that these are part of Jewish belief, just whether or not they are dogma. And so according to Rav Belitsky, Zichron Livrocha, it's wrong to say that Judaism is not a religion of dogma. Just the question is which beliefs are dogmas and which ones are not. But it's generally accepted within Orthodoxy that the 13 principles of faith are the Orthodoxy. They're the proper doctrine. Those are our dogmas. And that's what we follow in belief. And as I was saying, and again, I'm trying to reiterate something that I had recorded earlier, there's no really this disconnect between doctrine and practice in Jewish thought, but the Gemara in the end, the Talmud in the end of Makos, that all the 613 commandments can be summarized by one commandment of faith, that the prophet Habakkuk Habakkuk v'Hemid alachas. The Habakkuk put all the 613 commandments and said that they can be summarized by the one commandment, Tzadik L'Emunah Sayicheh, that the righteous lives by his faith. That faith is the summary of all the 613 commandments. And that the commandments are the expression of our faith. And I remember Rabbi Victor Miller, Zechus Yigalenu, who was, very interested in issues of faith and doctrine and belief. He explained that on Friday night when we recite Vayechulu, we recite the beginning of the second chapter of Genesis, the Talmud says that our sins are forgiven for that on account of that recitation, that an angel comes and places his hands on our heads and says, he quotes from Isaiah chapter 6, and your sin has been atoned, your iniquity has been atoned. How is that? How does that work? It's not a magic formula. Rather, it's because the sin is... That's how we fix it. So, and that's why we attain forgiveness and atonement by virtue of that recitation. It's because we are expressing ourselves by virtue of we're expressing our belief, and we're atoning, we're fixing that sin of heresy. And the truth is, many people are aware of the Mishnah in Sanhedrin that we say before Pirkei Avos, Kol Yisrael yesh lahem chelik l'olam haba. All Jews have a place in the world to come. But what they're not aware of is the second part. Elu she'ein lahem chelik l'olam haba. These are the ones who do not have a share in the world to come. And when we're listing those who lose their share in the world to come, is not a murderer, it's not the adulterer, it's not the Sabbath violator, but rather it's the heretic. It's the one who denies the resurrection. It's the one who denies the divine origin of the Torah. It's the polytheist. Those are the ones who lose their share in Olam Haba. Not issues of practice, of orthopraxy, but issues of orthodoxy are what causes a person to lose his chelik in Olam Haba, his portion in the world to come. So, with that being said, I would say that there is primacy to doctrine over practice in Judaism because of that, based on that Mishnah. Now, the only thing that I can say to counter that is Devarim shebalev einam dvarim. Words of the heart are not words. We go by what we as human beings who are not mind readers have to go by that which is openly, expressed in the world, in this world. So with that being said, the big example I would give is the resurrection. That's the most controversial one of the 13 principles of faith, and that's emblematic, meaning it represents an archetype of belief in Judaism, right? Because all throughout Chazal, there's this discussion of Tchisa Mesim in the Terminayan, right? Where do we derive the Torah that the Torah teaches of the resurrection? And with that being said, therefore, the concept of the resurrection, right, is an emblem of faith, right? The fact that someone believes in the resurrection represents that they believe in our faith, right, and that they're not heretical. And a friend of mine expressed some doubts about the resurrection, and so some people about the future resurrection, and so some people said, "Oh, so therefore he is a heretic." And then the answer I give is as follows: did he change the liturgy? Does he still say Baruch Atah Hashem Mechayeh Mesim? Does he still 3 times a day say, "Blessed art thou, O Lord, who resurrects the dead"? Yes, he says it. So as long as he says it, he recites the liturgy, he cannot be a heretic, because Dvarim Shebelev Enam Dvarim. The fact that he expressed some doubt does not brand him a heretic. The Reform movement, on the other hand, took that out of the liturgy. They changed the Siddur, something that the conservative movement did not do. The conservative movement maybe made some changes vis-a-vis egalitarianism, which is not issues of core doctrine and dogma. So that's actually, I wouldn't say it's okay, but it's not heretical. It doesn't cross that line of heresy, whereas the Reform movement essentially, although they're not essentially denying the resurrection, but they're codifying their doubt about the resurrection, which is sufficient to brand them as heretical. And so therefore, that's why the Reform movement has crossed the line of heresy. And so that is why, in my viewpoint, it is apt, because I know a lot of Gedolim were upset at this term orthodoxy, but not really because of the idea of doctrine versus practice, but rather because by calling ourselves Orthodox Jews, we're kind of lending some credence to the other movements and saying, and recognizing the existence of these other movements. I think pragmatically we have to recognize that they exist, whether or not, what kind of communion we want to have with them. That's a matter of debate. I can understand, but it doesn't change the fact that they're real, that they exist, that they're there. It's just, are they Judaism? In my view, conservative Judaism has not crossed the line. There are heretics who attend conservative synagogues, even heretics who are conservative rabbis. But the movement as a whole is still officially a halachic movement that also gives lip service to the Yid Gimel Ikrim. I'm pretty sure most conservative shuls, they still sing Yigdal, which we don't. Hasidim, we don't, because the Ariya Kodesh didn't sing it. Although I think there's a time and a place for Yigdal, maybe on Shvishal Pesach or Simchas Torah or something. I know by the Chabad they don't even say the Ani Mamins, but it's not because they reject it, But in any event, and I think in Brisk also they don't say Ani Mamins because they feel like it's like a catechism. But I don't know what's wrong with the catechism necessarily. But whereas the Reform movement has rejected basic doctrines totally, the resurrection, the divine origin of the Torah, and so forth. So therefore, they have crossed a line of heresy that I think is moving them outside of Judaism. But in any event, I don't think any of those Gedolim who are upset at the term Orthodox and prefer to say Torah Jews or something else had any issue with the centrality of doctrine in Judaism. in Orthodox Judaism. But the doctrine is how it's expressed, meaning, so if someone in their heart has doubts about, let's say again, the resurrection, but they didn't change the liturgy, they are expressing their orthodoxy through their orthopraxy, as opposed to someone who who denies it, right, and change the liturgy to express their denial. That's where we cross the line for heresy. So the expression of the orthodoxy is our orthopraxy. Well, if you have someone who is living an orthoprax life but expresses doubt, as long as they don't change the liturgy, they are still functionally both Orthodox and Orthoprax as far as we can measure. And then that issue of their doctrine is something that's in their heart. Like I said, for my Rosh Yeshiva, they said until he met Rav Victor Miller, he was observant, but he wasn't religious. And Rav Miller made him religious. I mean, this is a guy who grew up in a frum home, right? And now he's a big Rosh Yeshiva, he's a gadol, he's a tremendous person. But he spoke about his change in his life, and he said it was Rav Victor Miller who made him religious, made him orthodox, and not merely orthoprax. That he wasn't just doing things for the sake of doing them, he was doing them because he believed in them. And to me, I do see a primacy of orthodoxy over orthopraxy because of the fact that the Orthodox can always repent, but the one who has no doctrine has no means of penitence because they don't believe in it. So belief is very important in my understanding of Orthodox Judaism. I think the term orthodoxy is apt, and also for the fact of the matter that, especially out of town, as we would say, you have people who attend Orthodox shuls who you know they're driving on Shabbos, but they're Orthodox in the sense that they know doctrinally that this is true. This is something I always wanted to, and I've spoken to Dennis Prager on the radio a few times. I'd like to ask him. He always says he's not Orthodox. He's religious, but he's not Orthodox. I want to know, I understand he's not Orthoprax, but what is it doctrinally that he has issue with from the 13 principles of faith? Because that's really all it comes down to. More than that. Meaning, you want to believe, that every word of Chazal should be taken literally or not. Those are deos. Those are opinions. You want to believe in reincarnation or whatever else. Those are issues of deos. Those are opinions. Those are not. But the 13 principles, even though again there are opinions that reject whether or not they are dogmatic or not, nonetheless, we accept them as such. And so within modern day Orthodoxy, I would say those are our dogmas, are the 13 principles. The question whether they're more than those 13, no, there's nothing more than that are dogma. Everything else are deia, are opinions. All right, any questions or comments before we conclude? I think a half hour is a good time, and I'm going to try to eat something now. I see there's one fellow here. I don't know, a fellow or a lady, I don't know who it is, but it's one human being who's watching, and I appreciate that. And there were 3 earlier. But if otherwise, I'm going to end this live stream. I appreciate. Thank you for watching. God bless. Please like, share, and subscribe, comment. And I appreciate those who are watching it later. And please share. All right. God bless. Take care. All right. I turn it off like this. And this one.